like to call this work session to order. This work session deals with Anchorage energy landscape and opportunities analysis. Let's go around the table and identify ourselves for the record.
Forrest Dunbar.
Tim Steele. Chris Thompson.
Dick Training.
Felix Rivera.
Suzanne LaFrance.
Pete Peterson.
John Weddleton.
Brian Hirsch, author of the report.
Okay. Welcome, Mr. Mayor. So who's presenting? Okay. We shall begin. Do you want us to hold our questions to the end or ask you during the presentation?
Feel free to ask me during, I guess. It's a very brief presentation. I just have 6 or so slides to kind of set the frame, and then I assume it would be a pretty open discussion, but feel free to ask anywhere in between. This is kind of a fitting setting for this presentation because actually the whole project was kicked off in this very room. In fact, I think I was sitting in about this exact same seat. And so in March of now, I guess probably a year and a half ago, many of the department heads of the city were sitting around here, and many of the other staff, and we started with a very broad spreadsheet of just energy consumption, big users within the city, potential opportunities, and started soliciting input from the experts. No, you can have that for sure. Started soliciting input from basically the experts, which are the staff members who are seeing what's going on in the city. So anyway, just the result of that is this is a fitting closure of that whole event. And so I am Brian Hirsch. I was one of the co-authors of this Anchorage Energy Landscape and Opportunities Analysis report. And here's an overview of what we're going to talk about real briefly.
Brian, let me interrupt you for a minute. We've been joined by Mr. Croft. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. To the mayor's credit, at the beginning, I guess, of this term, many of us saw that there were some potential economic headwinds for the economy in Alaska and Anchorage in particular, in part with dependence on oil prices and production. And many of us could see the trend that we see here. And obviously, as we're all painfully aware at this stage, the city and the state are in some fairly challenging economic circumstances. And the intent of this report was to really get out ahead of some of those expected challenges and see what we can do with a little bit of prevention instead of a pound of cure at the end. In any kind of report such as this, it seems to make sense if you want to start with, well, where are we at? How much energy are we consuming at this point in time? And so there's a lot of data out there. There's a lot of conflicting sources, etc. But it was a challenge. But I think we pulled a lot of existing information together. And the hope is that that will be useful for future decision making that this body and others can use to help influence the future. And really the idea, as we're all aware, is any one entity, whether it's the municipality writ large or individuals within the municipality, mayors, council, assembly members, etc., everybody has a limited scope of what we have influence on. And so the idea here was really to set the baseline and understand what some of the consumption is at right now and how we can influence that. So what you see here is just kind of putting things in perspective, just residential energy consumption for electricity and heat, people living in their houses and turning on their lights and staying warm. That's about 54% of the electricity and natural gas consumption for all of Anchorage. So of course, if the muni wants to influence things, well, you can maybe influence some things by having policy and impact over, say, the residential sector. But if you want to really push the needle and you're talking about just, say, weatherizing your buildings, you're only at 4% of the energy consumption for the whole city. So obviously you're limited in what you can do along those lines. So some of your policy impacts really could have more, or policy initiatives could have more impact than just tightening up your buildings. At the same time, if we, I guess on the right-hand side, it's kind of hard to see here with all the lights on, but the upshot, this is just in, doesn't really matter what unit it's in, but the upshot is that there's more energy that is consumed for all of us driving around in our cars and all of the buses and trucks and things like that than everybody who uses electricity and natural gas to heat their homes. So again, if you're kind of going duck hunting where the ducks are with motor fuel, more so than, say, municipal buildings, for example. Moving along here, what we also wanted to just demonstrate was the level of dependence on natural gas for Anchorage, whether it's for electricity or for heat. And what you see here is 86+% of all of our end-use energy, electricity or heat, comes from natural gas. Historically, for many years, Alaska in general, and Anchorage in particular, was blessed with low natural gas prices, and we kind of had what we would say almost as like a hometown discount because our fuel supply is right out the door here, right, in Cook Inlet. In the last 5 or 7 years or so, what you see is that there's been a convergence of Anchorage and Alaska natural gas prices with the national and international markets. So from our perspective, what we've seen is significant price spikes without arguably, if you looked at it, right, it's not like the gas companies have actually had to spend more money to produce gas per se, but because they're now in a global market, they can charge more. And so, again, there's incentive perhaps to try to get off of some of our natural gas dependencies because we have little to no control over that at this stage. It's a much bigger market. Breaking out here, again, just putting things in perspective, on the left table here, you see residential, private, commercial, and then MOA, muni facilities. So in terms of the scale, you can see how small the muni is relative to people in their homes or commercial facilities. And yet, if you take that bottom left blue and orange bar chart and you expand that over on your right-hand side, what we see is actually, a fair bit of energy savings that the muni could actually achieve, which is almost $11 million a year. With the single biggest thing coming from streetlight efficiency, moving down the list there, school district, which of course isn't in the muni, but we wrapped it into municipal facilities, muni facility efficiency. So that's really the other facilities that the muni does have specific oversight and built payment obligations for, and then the AWU sludge gasification, regional landfill, capturing more methane from from the landfill, and then water and sewer and solid waste. So in any typical energy assessment, you want to generally start with the low-hanging fruit, which is energy efficiency. That's what we were just talking about a moment ago. People always focus on the spinning fancy wind turbines and the shiny solar panels, but the reality is the savings or your bang for your buck is coming from efficiency. All that said, there are also some fairly substantial renewable energy opportunities within the city. And again, of course, some of these Muni has some impact over, and some of them you have less impact over. The single largest one we identified was Fire Island Wind. And as I think most or all of you know, currently there's wind turbines out there. There's also a phase 2 under consideration that is currently eligible for a lot of federal subsidy, and that window will be closing in a year from December. So in 2018, there has to be the next level of construction and commitment that's occurred on Fire Island to take advantage of that. And another component of that, so what you could imagine there is, it's about $50 million of potential construction that would be, that the Anchorage economy would see if something were to happen. There's about $30 million of federal subsidy that would go toward that project. And of course, it has to fit and be cost competitive with other generation options that the utilities have. But so there's a lot of policy issues around that. But that's really by far the lion's share of where the renewable energy opportunities are. One thing that's not on this graph and that has already, it's in process and it is happening, and we do discuss it in the report more in detail, is the power pooling between Municipal Light and Power, Matanuska Electric, and Chugach Electric. So that is already happening, and that's actually an even larger amount of savings than what we've identified here under Fire Island. It has some potential implications on the positive side for Fire Island because it's a larger overall amount of power when you combine those three. The variability of Fire Island when the wind is gusting or not will have less impact on a larger base load, which would be the rest of the gas that's combined. So what I have here on the right is one of the kind of lessons that popped up from this report, which is really some of the collaboration that can occur that really costs close to nothing or absolutely nothing. In this case, I was at a meeting with the Port of Anchorage and MLMP when they were talking about what's happening next with the port and what the power impacts might be to the grid. And so as, again, I think all of you are probably pretty painfully aware, the port is looking at a fairly substantial cost-wise revamping, and there are some significant energy implications to that. And there's basically some better and not such better ways that you could approach that have some cost savings. And it might be one of those things that there may be some more upfront costs that have significant longer-term savings. So just wanted to highlight that because there's definitely been some collaboration in this, which is of course too detailed to peer into on the screen there, but is in the report starting on page 63. It's also in the executive summary. This is really kind of the marching orders for where things can go and the roll up of the entire report. And so some of them are muni opportunities, some of them are more private commercial opportunities. And again, while we all here may have more impact or potential impact on direct policies and things that the muni can do, you can also set policies or create incentives that private industry can make things easier for private industry and results in more investment, or for just local individual residences having a little bit more money in their pocket, then of course can spin out into more economic development as well. And just one last thing, because this is really the last summary that I would offer before we get into a hopeful dynamic dialogue here, is that really probably the single biggest thing that's kind of a no-brainer, but needs to be said and was the first item on here, is considering hiring an energy manager, which would basically be coordinating and managing all of these different efforts. And so on one hand, of course, you don't want people coming to you and saying, oh, you need to spend more money and hire more people, and that's sort of a typical thing maybe that a consultant would say. I will say that we were very, very conscientious about not recommending things that would cost more money or would cost the city money at all. It was really sort of what policies can you do? And in particular, for an energy manager, while on one hand, it is a staff position, or you can slice it a bunch of different ways, at the same time, we're pretty confident here, and we took great pains to demonstrate how an energy manager could essentially pay for their salary and many times over with the savings that they could achieve. And at the Anchorage School District right now, they are doing that very thing. They do have an energy manager, and we spent a lot of time with that person, and he has done many of the things that we're talking about here for the Muni facility. And we've also looked at actually the Fairbanks North Star Borough, based in Fairbanks, and they have also hired an energy manager who has been doing the same sorts of things that we're talking about here. And this report includes, for example, the job description that person was hired under, and some of the work that that person has done for Fairbanks, and demonstrated some of the energy development opportunities and savings opportunities that they've been involved in Fairbanks. So with that, I just, what could possibly go wrong at this stage, right? So just wanted to show this is, classic methane captured lake, actually, I think in Homer. And, when for some of the kids in their spare time, they poke holes and light fires, and, kids don't try this at home. But anyway, so there's some, some interesting energy opportunities that we don't even think about right before our eyes.
Thank you, Brian. Questions from Assembly members? Yes, John.
Not so much a question, but if the friendly local comic shop could put solar panels on their building today and switch all their lights to LED because of the math work, it's got to work here. It's just so obvious. You really have no choice.
Thanks, Chris.
Something cheaper or something.
There is, it's a good point, I appreciate that. There is sort of maybe a confounding cost driver that you want to think about, right? On one hand, right, as an individual or a business owner, for your particular circumstance, putting LED lights, putting solar panels makes sense because electricity prices are high. From the Muni's perspective, as ML&P being under your umbrella, what that means, of course, is that your enterprise is selling less kilowatt hours. And so there are some, divergent issues there, right? And so one of the things we did look at with this, under this study is, for example, are there places where we can increase demand that could help the Muni and MLMP? And one of the, I think, real big opportunities is electric transportation. And we're seeing it going substantially in lower 48 and around the world. We are quite far behind, and there's some good reasons for that. It's not like, blaming utility per se. There's a lot of reasons why we're at where we are. At the same time, I think that's a perfect example of where this report and other things, not just this, of course, could help us get out in front of, it's kind of like, who was it, Wayne Gretzky, who said, skate to where the puck is going to be, not where you see it right now. And so moving toward that, I think could really result in substantial load growth for the utility. And you go back to the slide that I mentioned right here, right? I mean, all of this effort and the single largest consumption of energy right now is burning liquid fuels for transportation, and that's not local. That's money that goes straight out the door. Even if we're at least burning natural gas, right? I mean, NSTAR's in the mix somewhere, and there's some gas producers, but I mean, the city owns some gas. And so if we can transfer some of our energy consumption from buying gasoline and putting it into electricity in our gas tanks, so to speak, that's a net input of money into this economy.
Anything else, John?
No, but thanks.
Chris?
Yeah, I hear Ethan over there talking, the mayor talking about electric buses, and that's what I wanted to talk about. That we have an opportunity, we're transforming, if this project goes through at Elmore and Tudor, our entire bus system, including the school district. And it seems like if you go back to the table on the previous page of savings, you have streetlight efficiency as number one, but school district building efficiency, MOA building efficiency together outstrips all of that.
Right.
If we start thinking collectively, we have all the school district buses and the municipal buses, we could really do something good in moving the ball forward. And it seems like if we're gonna see investment of scores of millions of dollars in new infrastructure for buses, we ought to think 20 years or 40 years ahead instead of yesterday.
I appreciate that. I would offer that you don't even need to think 20 or 40 years ahead. I mean, we look at this, in this report, we look at a scenario, right, with the Muni buses, with People Mover. And as, again, I think most or all of you are probably aware, generally you don't want to just transition one bus. You want to do at least 3 or 4 or some larger amount so you can have spare parts and train people and all that, although sometimes you have to start with one. I understand. I think that's what you guys are looking at right now. But many cities are now wholeheartedly transitioning. The buses are coming down in price. They're quite reliable, et cetera, and what there's currently still until federal fiscal year 2020, there is federal funding to supplement that, and we did kind of various scenarios. As I was mentioning earlier, kind of before we officially got started here, the city gets essentially a sweetheart deal on diesel fuel for People Mover buses that is well below market prices. And so if you were paying market prices, it would pencil out right now. With the price, however, that you are paying, and we're not advocating that you pay more in any way, shape, or form, if you add a couple kind of sensitivity factors to it, if you will, which would include a federal grant, and also the electric utilities right now in the late nights, they have excess capacity, right? And so they could be selling more electricity at maybe a lower rate than we're typically paying at retail, and they could still be making money. And so we looked at, say, a 10-cent rate instead of 17 cents, which is about roughly commercial and retail rates at this stage. And so at 10 cents, the utility's still making some money. You could charge the buses at 10 cents in the middle of the night. We were very conservative on making some assumptions around over $1 million in infrastructure improvements to the bus barn, because you're going to need new chargers and all sorts of things. And we came out with something like, I think a 7 or 8 year payback, something like that. So we're not talking 40 years at all.
And what I mean by 40 years is the useful life of a new building that we're contemplating building.
Sure,
And
sure.
the fact is, we could sink ourselves into being stuck 40 years into the future with technology of yesterday, where we can think forward, that's, I guess, what I meant by 40 years.
I'm just
Yeah.
offering that from the bus side, it's not like we have to,
today.
hope for 5 or 10 years from now that's gonna pencil out.
Right.
Forrest, your question?
Oh, I just wanted to, it was like Ethan was about to talk a little bit. I wanted to hear from him or from Abul Hassan about this electric bus initiative. How much do each of these buses cost relative to the buses we have, and what's the prospects here?
So the models that we've been looking at are, Proterra is the company that generates these. The E2 version is going on a single charge to about 235 to 270 miles to a single charge. Now, the vehicle that you might have heard of that we're trying to bring up in November, thanks to our friend here, Mark Spafford, and his assistants, is simply a pilot test. Currently, we are not budgeted to be able to do a replacement cycle for electric buses because mostly we don't meet the FTA criteria of the useful life on the diesels that we have. That will occur sometime around 2021. Basically, what that means is we use federal money to buy buses, and there is a useful life on them. That life, the shelf life will not expire until 2021. That is the earliest that we will be able to invest in electric buses, unless, of course, we expand further and we have a greater need for buses, at which point we would qualify. So those are things we're working on. But the vehicle in November, if we can get it up here in November, is the E2 version from Proterra. And frankly, we're doing it to acclimate not only our staff, the public, assembly members, as the case may be, government entities, to basically just say, here's what an electric bus looks like. Here are the things that you might anticipate. There is no sound coming from them. The feel is different. So it's basically the cool factor of what electric buses can do, and then together, hopefully, we can explore what the practicality is. There were some concerns that I know my staff, maintenance staff, had about winter weather conditions. But again, it's to me, it's, are you on the cutting edge? Do you take the risk to be able to go out there and explore new technologies, or do you wait for somebody else to be able to do that, and then you decide, oh, you're already 10 years behind. So we're trying that because a lot of other transit agencies are. King County Metro, as the case may be, just ordered almost 150 to 200 electric vehicles because they realize what the value is and what the gain is. And certainly we do as well. So we'll see how it happens and how it goes. It's supposed to be a 5-month deal until March of 2018, if it can get worked out.
So just a quick follow-up, Mr. Chairman. So two, one, are there electric vehicles for our smaller fleet, for our Anchorage fleet that we could explore? And then also, have you been in contact with the school district about when their useful life might, are they coming up before 2021, for example, any of their buses? Are they a candidate for this?
So their funding mechanism is different. Whereas we're federally funded 80-20 for these vehicles, the school district is not. My understanding is that the entire portion of their budget is state funded, and therefore they get no federal allocation.
We know how to shape the states.
But that is my understanding, that it is all state level funding and that they do not qualify for federal level funding even if they went out for electric vehicles. There were conversations on the back end about sort of remedying their energy storage issue by utilizing federal funding to be able to put a roof over their head, but that was a different conversation. I don't know if that's what you were alluding to previously.
Oh, for federal funding?
For example, right now, because these vehicles are on the outside, when what happens is you need an ambient temperature on these vehicles prior to school kids getting on. And so they don't use a Webasto type diesel to do the warming of the buses. They actually just run the engine, which causes these diesel emissions. And so you're idle for a good 20-30 minutes creating these diesel emissions to reach the ambient temperature. The solution to that was bringing them into a roof where you have warm storage to be able to mitigate those issues, which would then result in energy cost savings. And federal funding could foreseeable be used to do that.
On the Anchorage, on the smaller Anchorage
For
vehicles?
smaller vehicles, it's a twofold problem. One-fold is a fairly easy solution, as the policy committee for AMATS is going through the 2040 process. if funding can be allocated to begin considering what the infrastructure looks like to be able to charge smaller vehicles, then that makes it a lot easier on agencies like public transportation to begin investing in vehicles, service relief vehicles that are support vehicles for our buses to be able to become fully electric. And there are other models that can be played off of that to further generate revenue. But that is where we are right now. The infrastructure simply isn't there. I think there are 2 charging stations in all of Anchorage, and probably about 4 Teslas, if I recall.
Okay, thank you, Forrest. Tim?
Yeah, I don't want to spend all the time on buses, but in the news, obviously our bus barn issue has percolated up to the top of the discussion. It just seems to me that with the upgrades we're doing on our roads and our people mover system, it would be a great addition to have electric buses on the people mover route, certainly, even if the school district doesn't join in. But I see us needing to move that direction. It just it elevates the level of the city when you have the newer technology out on the street and people riding it. I think would increase ridership, and we would do a lot better in that regard. In terms of the school district, they're gonna need some solution as well, but funding is going to be a big issue if they got to replace the whole fleet at one time. So, but we do need to find a bus barn solution, and it would take away a few of the arguments the neighborhoods have if we weren't running the buses and anyway in the neighborhood. So.
If I could just maybe add a suggestion to that. I mean, we did spend a fair bit of time both with your staff trying to address the maintenance and infrastructure concerns. Honestly, from all of the opportunities in here, I think that electric buses are one of the highest potential, and for all the reasons we've talked about, and I think it really has some impact more broadly than just the obvious wow factor of moving into the future. And so, I mean, and in particular with the charging stations, what the assumption would be, as we really try to scratch our head on this, is that the electric utilities, of which there are several in Anchorage, have arguably a fair bit of incentive to, again, sort of get out ahead of this, which would mean probably installing some charging stations. And there is some federal funding for that, but there's also, in sort of priming the pump, if you will, the increase in demand that could result from that is quite substantial. And it has several other possible spin-offs around things like, for example, battery manufacturers. And the port of Anchorage here has been pretty proactive in looking at some battery and microgrid solutions for some of the resiliency challenges that the port may have if you ever lose power, for example, when a crane is operating, or just when you have a ship in dock and they need to get out the next day, sort of thing. And so there are some symbiotic or synergies that could really result from that with some of these kind of cross-departmental cooperation and some of this infrastructure investment.
I think we ought to look at it, even if we can approach the manufacturers and say, hey, we'd like to test a couple buses.
Yeah.
I think of my trips down Spenard Road where you have a lot of traffic and buses are behind that traffic, and then the bus stops to pick people up. Now we've got turnouts on Spenard Road, the upper part of Spenard Road, which are great, but then the bus has got to try and get in. But the bus is just sitting there, and you got heavy traffic, and you're in that traffic, and you pull up next to that bus, and it's got the noise, and it's got the odor. It just seems to me that it improves the quality of the experience when you have that type of
We priced, I think back to Forrest's question in terms of pricing, we priced the Proterra buses, and they were about $200,000 more than the baseline of about $550,000 for a typical new bus. So a Proterra was about $750. A conventional diesel bus was about $550,000 roughly. And so what you're talking about is, fuel savings on one hand versus capital cost on the other, right?
Yeah.
And so that fuel savings would again go back into the Anchorage economy through MLP.
And probably maintenance is about the same. You got to replace batteries periodically. and-
Yeah, maintenance, there's some questions about that. The buses claim it's less maintenance, although when I talked to your bus staff, what they said is the biggest maintenance issues are tires and brakes, which you're still gonna have those costs. So we just assumed it was neutral in this report. It may be some savings, and that would be kind of a conservative plus for electric buses, but we just left that flat so nobody could say.
Be nice to give it a try and see how the public likes it and see what kind of feedback we get.
Eric, you're next, sir.
Testing in King County Metro, the actual ratio did come back as, I think, at least a 0.25% savings if you convert it to a full electric fleet as opposed to diesel, just because of less moving parts.
Eric, you're next.
1/4%? Is that what you said, 1/4%?
Yes.
0.25%?
25%.
25%.
Eric?
Yeah, the other's not much. Do we have good net metering rates or poor ones? I see your provision on net metering, but I've heard some criticism that while we have net metering rules, you don't get enough payback from it. So in your opinion, do we have the right structure to encourage solar?
There are certainly places that have essentially more liberal or larger incentives for solar on net metering. Again, and I defer somewhat to Mark Johnson here, of course. The way the rules work here, and it really was a compromise, was that you're limited on the size, which is 25 kilowatts. And so, on the roof, you can only have 25 kilowatts, and you're squared up monthly. So, what some people say, if you really wanted to promote more residential solar, you would maybe not square up monthly, but you'd square up annually. Because of course, in Alaska, because we have so much sun in the summer and so little in the winter, you can only make so much in any one month, right? So after that month, you're zeroed back out, say in May, June, July, and August. Whereas if you had it over the whole year, you could build up a lot of surplus in those summer months and then draw it off in the winter months. That's more challenging for electric utilities.
Right.
So that's the balance.
The same reason it's beneficial for me as the homeowner with the solar panel.
Which is why it's correct.
Plasma charger.
You're on the list.
Clarification.
Okay,
We're
go.
limited to.
I'm calling on you anyway.
We have actually increased that with change to our tariff, and so now it goes up to 5 megawatts.
Okay. And then on solaring, is Chugach doing a community solar project, and are we involved? I don't know much about it, but I've heard that.
Shugach is looking at a community solar, which would be solar panels on the side of the South Central Power Plant, which we own 30% of. It's a relatively small.
I heard it was bigger and they downscaled it, but anyway, it's relatively small now.
Based on what we have seen, and we haven't gotten a lot of information, they brought it up to us at the SPP Operating Committee. We talked about it, but what they said is we would like to build it, and we said, can you provide us some information on what it's going to be, how it's going to work, and we're still working.
Well, yeah, so that's what I'd heard as well. I'd love us, if it's possible, or certainly if it's profitable, to participate with them. So if you could re-ask Jim, because I'd like us at least not to be an impediment, but maybe
We are gonna put solar on
Just to clarify maybe one other thing, there's a meaningful difference between what people call community solar and then utility-owned solar per se. And so community solar would essentially mean people in the community buying a subscription, so they would essentially pay up front, almost like a community-supported agriculture. People are familiar with that at all. So you buy, like, theoretically, you were buying 4 solar panels somewhere, right? You don't have them on your roof because maybe there's trees on your neighbor's house and you have bad shading and there's all these kinds of issues. So you're buying a part of a bigger system. And that bigger system is lower per unit cost because you're doing it in larger scale. The utility is often involved in that. They typically are involved in that. But so the utility could run a community solar program where they don't essentially pay anything. They're taking subscriptions from their ratepayers and saying, who wants to buy this? And only some people get it, other people don't. Whereas, like, for example, if you think about Fire Island or a utility-owned solar project, the utility would just do it and everybody would pay whatever, half a penny or whatever the cost is on top of their current
So
bills.
we're
to
calling
do
it
that.
community, but it's really the other.
I'm not sure which
It's the
one.
other state.
The two-ditch proposal is community solar. They would hang the solar panels on the side of the building, and then they would have subscribers to the power that was delivered from those. We, MLMP, we have looked at a utility-size solar. We've looked at up to a 5 megawatt type facility, and been working through a number of proposals because the price was the challenge for us. And of course, you need a lot of space for something that's 5 megawatts.
Eric, I've got 3 other people.
Okay, then is there a time frame when our diesel deal runs out? Is that discrete or is it an ongoing?
When he gets started,
For the buses.
Yes.
I know.
Presently, I'm not aware of a sunset clause on the rates that are receiving. They do fluctuate based on how the market is going in terms of per barrel.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Pete.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So our landfill is producing more methane, and so we're in the process of getting ready to expand the electricity production. If I'm remembering correctly, I think that the base already is buys pretty much already all that we make, but there's not more demand from base to buy. Is there or is there not?
There's and again, Mark, please, you may have some insight on this, but my understanding is that while the current name of the base is Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson, in fact, Elmendorf and Richardson, from an electrical standpoint, are not fully interconnected, and so there is a bottleneck. So I think Richardson is the one that is, I forget honestly if it's Elmendorf or Richardson. One of the two is buying the power, the other one essentially isn't because they can't right now because of a interconnection constraint. And so if those two were tied together electrically, then that demand could be absorbed all on the base.
So they need to change the grid on base or something?
Well, currently, most of the time when it runs, Fort Rich is able to utilize the full capacity. There are times, it's generally in the evening when people go home, they're not running their facilities, that they can't utilize all of it. Brian is correct that the two bases are not connected, and they have looked at, because Doyon owns the system on Fort Ridge, and then Elmendorf owns the system on Elmendorf. They have looked at interconnecting the two systems and are doing some work associated with that. What we have worked with both the base and Doyon on is to wheel power, so they could take the excess power from the Fort Ridge side, put it across our system, and actually deliver it to the Elmendorf side. So as they increase the capacity of production, they would be able to get the power over to the Elmendorf side. And in looking at their estimates, it's significantly cheaper for them to wheel it across our system than it is to actually build the infrastructure necessary to connect the two bases.
Fantastic.
Is that all, Pete?
One additional one?
Okay.
And I noticed they're talking about using sludge from AWW. Is that something that's in the works, or is that something
Sludge.
further down the road that might happen, or?
Right.
I'm sorry.
Wake up. I was just asking a question about if we're really planning to use the sludge, or is that something that's futuristic, or?
It's happening around the country and around the world right now. We've come to the realization that our sludge incinerator uses more water than any other facility in the city. And our sludge incinerator also uses a tremendous amount of gas and generates a lot of heat. We are wasting a potential resource recovery operation by burning all that gas and sending all that heat out into the netherworld. So what we want to do is change our process so that we can make it a resource recovery operation rather than just a waste. We did some work last year and in some preliminary penciling out, and it looked like gasification, which is creating methane gas out of that sludge material, looked like that would pencil out. So we took a step forward. We sent a Connex load of sewage sludge to Germany. Imagine when it got caught in customs and couldn't make it. What is this? Sludge. So we're piloting a process in Germany, and we expect to have right upon the results of that this fall. In the meantime, we're not limited to the gasification as the only process. Pyrolysis, there's anaerobic digestion, there's a number of different ways to produce energy from organic waste like sewage sludge, including co-digestion with food waste or with other organic waste as well. So we've been talking with solid waste services about looking at that possibility as well. But I anticipate that through a study that we're beginning this year on our total look at sewage solids, that we will come to a decision about what path we want to take, hopefully by the end of next year, and within 5 years, it'd be my goal to take our incinerator down and have that replaced with a process that recovers a lot more energy.
Great, thank you. I've got Chris, Suzanne, and Felix. Chris?
You just.
I think Mark has more to add.
Yeah, just to clarify about the landfill gas, I mean, Doyon uses 80% of the landfill gas that we're collecting, so that's all the capacity that they have to generate electricity before Ridge. 20% of the gas that we're collecting just automatically gets flared. So this summer, I know for a fact that they were utilizing 100% of the gas that we were collecting, or they were collecting, to use on their generators when they had on-time and off-line. And so we're currently working with Doyon right now to get them to a point where they're happy with making the capital investment to build additional generator capacity, so that way they can power, the entire base during the winter. Because basically, I think during the winter they do like 50 or 60% of the power generation from the landfill gas plant, whereas the rest comes from whatever NLP or whatever. So, thanks.
Great, thank you.
Chris?
Yeah, so I got a couple
Suzanne.
quick points. Mr. Hassan, in the new bus routes that are coming, aren't we doing a neighborhood-specific route for some neighborhoods that are smaller buses that aren't anchor rides, though? They're bigger than that, right?
No, they actually are Anchorage vehicles. We just reconfigured them and reconfigured sort of
Okay.
the internal layout
Gotcha.
to make them feel a little different.
Okay, and are those in the same replacement cycle?
No, they're actually on a quicker replacement cycle. They get replaced every 4 years, except the buses that are veering between 12 years and 15 years.
Right, so it almost makes a lot more sense to start with the neighborhood buses, the ones that are crawling through in front of houses, to be the ones that are quiet and more resilient. Okay, number two is you have leadership on AMATs, which is quite amazing. Mr. Weddleton proposed, and we passed requirement into the the Metropolitan Transportation Plan to study and create policy for the regional metropolitan transportation on electrical vehicles. And then the last point I have is a question, really. What do we do now to set policy for efficiency, renewability, and resiliency? Because all this is really getting towards the resiliency idea of us being able to be stable over time and affordable. And what's the next step for policy? Anybody who's in the executive?
I just didn't want to take somebody's
Yeah, go ahead.
direction. So I think in the not even the big picture, the medium picture, right? There are some specific recommendations in here. For example, LED streetlights, which you folks are already doing, but there's Municipality of Anchorage, standard specifications. There's some procurement issues and specification documentation that you folks have that are challenges to cost-effective procurement. There are, there's some things that are essentially low or no cost type activities that you folks can do.
So, if I might interrupt, I think that what I'm looking for
We're out of
is
time.
what's the assembly's function, because that's an administrative function. I think we need to set a policy. Sure. And I don't know what that is, and we'll talk. We're good.
Okay.
You're good, okay. Anything else, Chris?
It sounds like you got it.
They tell me they don't have any questions, so This work session is over with.